All E5s use knowledge to self-preserve in some way, but unlike the social 5 who uses niche and interesting knowledge to promote himself socially, intellectualism is put towards survival for the self-preservation 5. The view of the self-preservation 5 is that in order to survive, they have to know more. Knowledge allows them to approach situations with less fear. It's a survival tactic. For the self-preservation 5, who believes that the resources they have are non-renewable and need to be stocked up, knowledge becomes a form of protecting themselves from the external world. This behaviour in the E5 stems from the neurotic belief that happens in early childhood that the environment is invasive and therefore they must keep themselves protected. In order to avoid the intolerable, this character sacrifices a part of itself to erect a defensive nucleus and, in a schizoid way, the relationship with its own emotional world. I feel as though a point that is always missed is that the main passion of any type 5 isn't knowledge but avarice. The knowledge they present is a byproduct of their avarice rather than a cause. Avarice within the self-preservation 5 can often be the opposite of encouraging intellectualism and instead may be preventing him from learning and growing as they use their isolation to filter the information that they receive from the outside world. Enneagram 5s operate under the belief that they do not belong in the world, leading them to have a strong disinterest in relationships, giving up the idea that they will receive anything from others, reduction of one's own needs to a minimum until they almost disappear, and hiding until they become invisible. By turning to this fixation of isolation, the character falls into mental and physical stagnation. Isolation is what allows me to survive, keeps me alive. Hand in hand with isolation goes the search for inner silence, both external and internal, which raises the tendency for introversion to the nth degree. The 5 places total trust in their thoughts and the idea that if I think hard enough about a thing, I will find a solution. For the 5, their internal mind is a place of refuge from a daunting and frightening outside environment. The relationship involves alienation from one's own preferences and authentic expression. Stress arises and the need to recover to find oneself in solitude. One of the main focuses of the self-preservation 5 is to remain autonomous and self-sufficient. The self-preservation 5 often buries their emotions, separating them from logic and reasoning so that no one can uncover them. Knowledge as a space of abstraction becomes a safeguard before the world, a refuge of security. It can also be a way of relating to the other, but as a mere spectator. It is an escape route, which gives pleasure. The observer of the world uses knowledge in survival mode. It is to be prepared in front of a hostile and inconsistent world, since knowledge brings order and analysis in the face of chaos. He indulges in an endless preparation for life through things such as reading. He never feels ready enough to hop into action. He prefers to classify and analyze information without going into the streets, hence forming a preference of intellectualization over direct experience. There is a deep desolation where nothing touches, the absurd and nonsense. He describes it as a dryness, aridity, an existential desert, because there is nothing. This feeling of the living dead is due to disconnection with the body and emotion. The self-preservation 5 feels guilt for existing, with the crazy idea of not deserving life, as if it were occupying a space that does not belong to it, and its existence was a mistake. The self-preservation 5 is a perfectionist who identifies with the loser. Deep down, he is strict and severe, but he does not show it in more than a passive-aggressive way. This confidentiality also obeys the selfishness of the miser, who does not share what happens to him, in his glass capsule. Because Kusuo Saiki is a character that does not outwardly seek knowledge, especially in an academic aspect, he is often seen as a character representative of E9 over E5. As a character, Saiki isn't someone who actively seeks out knowledge, however, we see how he uses the knowledge gained from his psychic ability in his everyday life. He understands everything about the people around him in order to survive. This is the way he collects and compartmentalizes knowledge to make sure he's never caught off guard. Saiki takes advantage of his psychic ability to ensure that he is never surprised, which is why characters like Nendo scare him, as he is never aware of what he's thinking or what he'll do next.
だからいきなりお、どうした相棒ただの粘土だだが今一瞬見えたものは投資いや考えすぎて幻覚を見ただけだ気のせいだ考えるのはよそう
This is a safety net for Saiki, to the point where he's barely able to function when his powers are gone. He's constantly afraid, nervous of his outside environment. While Saiki is bothered by having to listen to the problems of others constantly, he chooses to so that he's more aware of his environment and can keep himself away from the things he finds troublesome. Saiki can be seen as a character who uses a less conventional way of finding knowledge in the Enneagram 5, but he still does. Saiki uses his psychic powers to collect and retain knowledge for his own safety and survival, collecting information about others as a resource or a lifeline. Because Kusuo is a character that has had to accept that he has very little, in his view, due to his psychic abilities, he has learned not to expect a lot from the world. He can't enjoy everyday things due to his psychic ability, which is an inconvenience to him, someone who just wants to enjoy a normal life. When he was younger, he was a lot more open and expressive, which quickly changed once he realized the extent and abilities of his powers led him to be disliked and inconvenienced. Because of this, he learns to be reserved and only uses his powers selectively to keep himself protected and nothing more.
Level 上げやる
Another example of how search for knowledge can be used by E5s less conventionally is Kozume Kenma from Haikyuu. He puts all his efforts and knowledge into video games and volleyball, which is unconventional for knowledge seeking, yet it becomes his own way of intellectualizing his external environment. Video games for Kenma is how he views his whole external world, to the point where he even equates real life to video games so that he can understand and navigate better. For Kenma, knowledge from video games is a way to keep him protected from participating in a world that he believes rejects him.
朝5時頃、寝坊常習の研磨の部屋にしょっちゅう電気がついてて、徹夜と思いきや午前2時に早起きしたんだってやつ、ゲームするために。徹夜したら親にゲーム捨てられるけど、
走るのは嫌い。でも走る時の景色と走りながら考えることはちょっと好き。パワーアップ。
Kenma's extreme love for video games is sometimes viewed as E9 narcotization, which it isn't necessarily. I feel like people view characters having extreme interests as narcotization when it's not always the case. For Kenma, video games are a way to translate the fact that he cannot understand his external world and the people in it, which is why he relies so heavily on video games to understand it. When he is fighting with Yamamoto about guts, Kenma states that he's sick of all this guts crap, it's not like it will help you survive with 1 hit point. This is an example of how Kenma translates what he learns in video games into his everyday life in order to cope and understand. For him, it's all about survival.
仲間のために頑張るはおかしいこと。俺がやったらおかしいな。何？
Of course, it's important to recognize that fictional characters are not the same as real people and therefore cannot be typed and perceived in exactly the same way. Because neither of these characters are fully rounded people that we know everything about, we can never be 100% sure of how to type them. However, I wanted to use both of these characters to show what intellectualism can look like in the Self-Preservation 5 when it's not necessarily academic.